Hello everyone, this is Dr. Fouladian, and we're going to talk about the second part of the chapter 6 regarding the skeletal system axial division. Let me go to the part. We talked about all the skull and oops. Now we're going to talk about the vertebral column. So vertebral column in adult vertebral column is made up of 26 bones. 24 of them are vertebrae of the three regions of the vertebral column. Cervical region has 7 cervical vertebrae, thoracic region has 12 thoracic vertebrae, and lumbar region has 5 lumbar vertebrae. And we have one sacrum that has been 5 vertebrae, but then all fused together become one single bone. And the same is for the coccyx that have been 3 to 5 vertebrae that fuse together and makes one single coccyx. Pay attention that as a normal variation, sometimes not all the coccyx bones fuse completely, so it is okay that some people may have more than one coccyx bone, coccygeal bone actually. Now, the functions of the vertebral column. Vertebral column encloses and protects the spinal cord. So it is like a cage that the whole spinal cord is inside and all these bones are covering and protecting outside of them. Supports the skull, as the skull is located over the vertebral column, so it supports the weight of the skull, the movements of the skull, and all those. Supports the weight of the head, neck, and trunk. Transfers weight to the lower limbs, and also helps maintain the upright position of the body, all by the vertebral column. So here in this picture, you see that first look at the vertebral regions that we have that defined by the anatomical characteristics of the individual vertebrae. Cervical region, we have the cervical vertebrae, we call them by C and the numbers C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7. So it is like the number of the time that you eat breakfast, 7 a.m., right? For the thoracic region, we call them by T, and we have 12 of them. Therefore, we have T1 all the way to T12. For the lumbar region, so 12 is reminding you at the 12 p.m. for the lunchtime, right, at the time of the noon. For the lumbar, you have 5 lumbar vertebrae. We call them with L, L1 to L5, right? Like at 5 p.m. you can have a supper, right? So 7, 12, 5, these are the number of the bones, vertebrae that we have in these regions. And finally, we have one single sacrum and one single coccygeal bone or coccyx. Pay attention to the orientation of the vertebrae, that they have a thick part of them toward anterior here. These are the part of the bone, we call them body, like this is the body here. All the bodies are toward the anterior side of the body. So just learn it here because it helps you later regarding many structures that you're going to learn related. Now, besides the vertebral regions and all the vertebrae that we have, as you will see, vertebral column is not a complete straight line from up to bottom. It has some curves. We have some primary curves and some secondary curves. The primary curves develop before birth, and secondary curves develop after that. So in other words, the person is born with primary curves, and then later it gets some secondary curves. Which ones are primary? So if you look at my hand here, if this is the anterior side of the body and the other side is posterior side of the body, when the person borns, it has a big C-shaped curve that it is concave toward the anterior side, right? And if you look at the picture that is in front of you, you see that the thoracic region is like that, the thoracic area, and also the sacrum is like that. That is concave, like a cave, concave toward the anterior side of the body. These are the first two curves that we have when a person is born, and we call them kyphotic curve, and those are primary curve. So thoracic curve and sacral curve are kyphotic, and they are primary. Then newborn is born after a while, like after 6 months, they start to holding their head, holding the neck and also the head, right? And that is the time a secondary curve in the cervical area is developing, right? But as you see, the direction of that is opposite. That is concave toward the posterior. That is a secondary curve, and we call it secondary curve, and we call it lordotic curve. And the same is also for the lumbar area, that the lumbar curve is formed after a while that the person is standing and start walking, and that's around between the first and second year, right? So that is another lumbar curve, is another lordotic curve, and that is the other secondary curve. So reviewing those ones, we have 4 major curves of the vertebral column: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. And these curves, along with muscle attachment to the various vertebral processes, help to maintain the balance. If it was completely like one curve, or it was completely straight, we did not have the ability that we have now regarding the positioning, regarding the flexibility, and many of the others. So this is just all the things that I mentioned regarding the primary curve, that we call them kyphotic curve, and they are concave to the anterior, and those are included the thoracic and sacral region. And the secondary curves that develop afterward due to the development of the areas of the cervical and lumbar, and call them lordotic, that they are concave to the posterior. So this is just showing the vertebral column from the side, and you see that this side is anterior. That's the place that you have all the bodies of the vertebrae here, and this is toward the posterior. You see that the cervical and lumbar are lordotic curve, and thoracic and sacral are kyphotic curve, and the coccyx that is tapered. So here in this picture you see more curves of the vertebral column. So this one is in the exaggeration of the thoracic curve that we call it kyphosis. The example of that is the hunchback of the Notre Dame. And the other one is the exaggeration of the lordotic curve in the lumbar area, that it may happen normally in pregnancy, and after pregnancy goes away. We call it lordosis. So lordosis is the exaggeration of the lordotic curve of the lumbar area. Besides those ones, you see that the alignment of the vertebral column normally from the posterior to the anterior should be straight. It means that when we look from the anterior to posterior, it should not have been tilted in any side, right? But it should be straight. If it is not straight and bends to one side, that's the one that we call it scoliosis, and that is always abnormal. So regarding the anatomy of the vertebra, in general, if we want to talk about a typical vertebra has some parts, although you will see that different regions of the vertebral column, they might be totally different from each other, but still we can say that all the vertebrae have some specific parts that is common between. So first, vertebra is singular and vertebrae is plural for that. The first thing that we have over each vertebra is the body. The body supports weight along the axis of the body, and as we said, this is in anterior part of the body, toward the anterior. Still is in the back of the body, but the body of the vertebra is toward the anterior. That's the most anterior part of a vertebra. The vertebral body is separated from another vertebral body by a pad of cartilage that's called the intervertebral disc. But hopefully you remember that what type of cartilage is that. Intervertebral disc comes from the fiber cartilage, right? Here you see you see the whole vertebral column, and you see the bodies of the vertebra, and you see that between them you have intervertebral disc. So we said that the vertebral body is toward the anterior of the body, and it means the whole body. And after that we have an arch. We call it vertebral arch. So it is like a complete arch after the body. If this is the body, an arch is connecting to that one. We call it vertebral arch. Now let's see what part do we have in the vertebral arch. Vertebral arch forms the vertebral foramen. That's the hole that we have between the body and the arch, and made of pedicle and lamina. I will show you where is pedicle and where is lamina, and you have to differentiate these two from each other and recognize the location. Pedicle is more close to the body of the vertebra, and lamina is away from that. Then on the posterior part, we have a spinous process that projects posteriorly, and on the side of that, we have the transverse processes that project laterally. So if you look at this vertebra as a common vertebra or typical vertebra, you see that you have body, that you see vertebral body, that's toward the anterior. Therefore, the other side is posterior side, right? Then you have one arch, vertebral arch, that it has one part here that we call it pedicle, that as you see closer to the vertebra, and it has one part here that we call it lamina, that is further away from the vertebral body, right? So all these ones, this arch here, vertebral arch, and the body together make a foramen here, that we call it vertebral foramen, simply, right? That is the place that when we put them all together, one after another, they make a canal, vertebral canal. So that's a collection of each vertebral foramen, one after another. The whole length of the vertebral column is called vertebral canal, right? Vertebral foramen or foramina makes the vertebral canal. That the spinal cord is passing through the vertebral and vertebral. Then you saw that the arch is coming from the pedicles here and the lamina here. And you see that at the posterior you have a spinous process, and on the lateral side you have two transverse processes. Besides this one, pay attention that each bone is going to attach to the next bone, and this one to the next, and this one to the next. Therefore, there are some joints between these ones. Each vertebra is a bone is going to make a joint with the next vertebra, right? So those parts of the bone that are going to make a joint that they are called articular process. We said that process is any part of the bone that is projecting outward, right? So these are a process and they are taking part in the joint. Joint is called articulation. So these are articular process. We have one on the superior part. If it is one single vertebra, you have it one on the upper part, one on the lower part. Why? Because each vertebra is going to make a joint with the upper vertebra and another joint with the lower vertebra, right? So the upper vertebra, imagine if this is one upper vertebra and this is one lower vertebra, these two together join. That's very simplifications. That's not this simple. So that's these two join to each other and keep both bones next to each other so that they don't get separated. So the whole bony part is called the process, but only one surface of the whole this process taking part in the joint. We call that part as the facet. Like here you see that the whole part here is the process, superior articular process, and this face of that is called superior articular facet. The same is for the inferior articular process and inferior articular facet that is on the other side of the. So articular processes take part in the joints between the two consecutive vertebrae, superior articular process and inferior articular process. And the articulation that we have, or the joint that we have, vertebra have articular facet, the surface of the process which take part in the joint. And we talked about the vertebral foramina, that when they stack over each other, make the vertebral canal. And vertebral bodies are separated by intervertebral discs. We talked about that, and this results in creating bone spaces on each side called the intervertebral foramina. So make sure you differentiate vertebral foramina from intervertebral foramina. Each vertebra has one vertebral foramina between the body and the heart. That all together, when they stack make the canal, vertebral canal. But when we put these vertebrae over each other, the shape of the vertebra is a way that one space remains empty here on the sides, one in this side, one in this side, like the two sides of the vertebra all the way down. But we have one between each two vertebrae, like this. Those ones are called intervertebral foramina. So the complete intervertebral foramina doesn't form until at least two vertebrae connect over each other and make a joint. So in this picture you can see that completely. You have three vertebrae here that the 1.5 of them have been cut in half so that you can see the other side from the medial view, and this one can be seen from the lateral view. You see that you have this is the space for the vertebral foramen of this one, vertebral foramen of this one, and vertebral foramen of this one is behind this or behind this vertebra, right? All together when they slide make the vertebral canal. And we see that here, when this vertebra and this vertebra are connecting to each other by this joint, then a space, this half space of this vertebra on the lateral side and this half space of this vertebra on the lateral side makes a complete foramen, what we call it intervertebral foramen. We said that in the whole canal, vertebral canal, the spinal cord is going down. Now, what is passing through the intervertebral foramen? That's the spinal nerves that are coming out of the spinal cord and they're going to go out of the vertebral column, right? To go to different parts of the body. So you have the whole spinal cord through the vertebral canal, and you have one single spinal nerve that coming out of each intervertebral line. And this is another picture that you see again, the vertebral column. The whole, all vertebra together is called column, vertebral column, right? Now, in the middle, you have a canal, vertebral canal, that the spinal cord, you don't see that very well actually here. You just can see the intervertebral lamina, like this one, this one, this one, each one, because you're looking at the side. At the same time, you can see through the vertebral canal, right? So when you look at the actual vertebral column, you can have a better idea of all this. Now for the regions, we said that we have three regions. Beside the sacrum and coccyx, we have three regions: cervical region, thoracic region, and lumbar region. We said that the cervical region, we're talking about the bone vertebra. Its cervical region has 7 vertebrae, C1 to C7. Thoracic region has 12 vertebrae, T1 to T12, and lumbar region has 5 vertebrae, L1 to L5. That again, you see the same parts, C1 to C7, T1 to T12, L1 to L5, and then after these three regions, we have sacrum and coccyx. Now, you need to know all these parts of the vertebra. It means that all the 26 vertebrae that you have. But for the cervical region, cervical region, thoracic region, and lumbar region, you need to know some characteristics of them. How do you distinguish them from each other? Like region by region, cervical region from thoracic region from lumbar region. For the thoracic and lumbar region, you do not need to recognize them one by one, like T1, how does it look, T2, how does it look, or whatever. Just distinguish thoracic vertebrae from the other regions, right, from the cervical and from the lumbar. The same is for the lumbar too. But for the cervical region, there are a few of them that you need to recognize, specifically two, besides the whole cervical vertebrae. So, in general, we have 7 cervical vertebrae, as we said, that they support the weight of the head, and spinous processes of them are bifid. It means that it has the two ends at the end of the spinous process, except for the last one, that we see C7. Now, all the transverse from all of them have one extra foramen on each side, that we call it transverse foramen. Transverse foramen on each side go together, transverse foramen. And the transverse process are fused to the costal processes. That's the one that makes the transverse foramen. So besides that, this is the general characteristic and unique characteristic for the cervical vertebra. It means that if a vertebra has a transverse foramen on each side, it is cervical vertebra. If it doesn't have, it is not cervical vertebra. So in the thoracic and lumbar area, you don't see any transverse foramina on the side next to the transverse process. Now, beside this general characteristic that you recognize which vertebra is cervical vertebra, and therefore, if a vertebra doesn't have it, we can say that this should be a thoracic vertebra or a lumbar vertebra. But among the 7 of them, there are 3 of them that are specific, and we need to know about them specifically. The first one, that is called C1, has another name that is called Atlas. You can remember that we say that if you go from the down toward the up, you can say that C1 is at the last, right? So that's the way that you can memorize it or recall it. C1 is Atlas, Atlas is at the last, right? And C2, the next one, is called Axis because of the specific shape that it has. Now let's see all these 7 cervical vertebrae. So as you see, you have in the cervical region of the vertebral column, you have these 7 vertebrae: C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7. So as you see here, this C7, this is the other one that you need to know about that. It is called vertebral prominence because the way that is located in the body, the spinous process of that projects under the skin toward the outside, and it can be felt easily. So it is prominent, therefore it's called vertebral prominence. And they use it as a landmark, like for example, they may want to do some procedures inside of the body. For example, they want to put a needle from the back side of the body to, for example, draw some fluid from the lung, just as an example, right? So this is a good place to start counting the vertebra, therefore counting the ribs that are connecting, because for the thoracic regions, each thoracic vertebra is connecting to one pair of the rib from both sides, right? So that's a good way to start counting the vertebra, be able to count the ribs to find the proper place that you are searching for, right? So it's significant that you can find it easily. The other ones that you need to know is C1 and C2. Next, let's take a closer look and to see how they look like. C1, that is Atlas, C2, that is Axis, right? So first, this is a typical cervical vertebra. First, as we said, the spinous process is bifid, that you can see here, except the C7. All other 6 of them have their bifid spinous process. Then, the other things that is significant is this foramen that they have between the transverse process and the process that we call it costal process here. So make a foramen on each side, and whenever you see that, you can say that this is a cervical vertebra. If you don't see that, you can say that this is not a cervical vertebra, it should be thoracic or lumbar. And so this is general things about all of the cervical vertebrae. Now let's go over them one by one, the things that are specific. First, Atlas, or C1, that is located at the very end, Atlas, right? If you go from this way. So C1 or Atlas articulates or makes a joint with the occipital condyles of the skull. We said that the condyle are the place that the two bones are going to make a joint with each other. So occipital condyle is part of the occipital bone that is going to make a joint with the vertebral column. And the first vertebra from the vertebral column is C1 or Atlas, right? So this Atlas is going to articulate with the occipital bone at the occipital condyle. And if you look at this C1, you see that this is the anterior view anterior side, this is the posterior side of that. As you see, in spite of all the other vertebrae, this anterior part of the vertebra has no body like the other vertebra, right? It's just one simple ring, the same as the arch that we have for the posterior, we have one arch for the anterior too, right? So this is the things that is specific for the atlas, and that's the way that you recognize it from all other cervical vertebrae. So the first thing that you notice that it has the transverse foramen, so you can say that it is a cervical vertebra, and it is an atlas because it has no body here. It's a complete ring as you see. So because it has no body, the foramen, vertebral foramen that it has the biggest among all the vertebral foramen of the cervical regions and all the vertebrae downward too. Has the largest vertebral foramen and allows the head to nod in a yes manner in this way. So that's the way that the atlas is moving. The second one is the axis or C2. So the important things about the axis is it has a process that is called dens, and that is this part of that. As you see, it has a body. C2 has a body in spite of the C1, and it has one arch, and it has a vertebral foramen that is smaller than the C1. And over the body, you see that this part has been projected upward. This is the one that we call it dens, and on the next picture you will see that how axis is going to be connected to the atlas to make a joint and rotate over each other, right? So the transverse ligament binds the dens to the atlas, that I will show you how and where does it located, how transverse ligament, that you need to know the name, is connecting the dens of the axis to the atlas. And this joint that is made between these two, as the atlas is connects to the whole head through the occipital condyle. Now axis is connecting to the atlas and helps the whole head to move over the axis and allows the head to move in a no manner, right? Again, you see the transverse foramen here. Pay attention that sometimes you have to rotate the vertebra to see the transverse foramen, so you have to look at that in every angle. And here you see that how the atlas, that is the first one, going over the axis, the second one, and how these dens of the axis located here and this transverse ligament here securing the position of the dens here and the way that the atlas and axis are rotating over each other. So that's the positioning of them and how they are moving compared to each other. And the last one from the cervical region that we said that is important is C7, that we call it vertebral prominence, has a long prominent spinous process. So this is the place that starts a ligament attaching to that, attaching to C7, we call it ligamentum nuchae. That is a large elastic ligament and begins at the vertebral prominence and extends upward to the external occipital crest of the skull. That's a line over the occiput or occipital bone, and a ligament from the C7 goes all the way to attach to that area. And if we have a sudden motion of the head like this, results in the vertebral damage due to the damages that comes to all these structures that we have here, vertebral connections, all these things, and things including the. So that was regarding the cervical vertebra. Now we're going toward the thoracic vertebrae, and over here you do not need to know any specific of the T1 to T12 vertebrae, but you need to know how to recognize a typical thoracic vertebrae from the other two regions. So first of all, you can recognize it from the cervical region. How? It doesn't have any transverse foramen, right? That's the first thing. But how to recognize it from the lumbar region? So thoracic vertebrae, there are 12, and all of them have rib articulation points. Articulation means joint, right? So it means that each thoracic vertebrae is connecting to one rib on each side. Therefore, a pair of the ribs are attaching to each thoracic vertebra. So you don't need to know all these details that I put them in gray. It means that you won't be asked about these ones, but you need to know that they support the ribs. And the important thing about the thoracic vertebrae that is common between them, that most spinous processes point inferior. If you look at the picture of a typical thoracic vertebrae, you will see that here that look at the spinous process of the vertebra. You see that's almost a long spinous process, and the direction that is located is tilted downward. So this is the way that you recognize a typical thoracic vertebra. As we said, that the spinous process is long and is downward, right? Later I will show you a typical lumbar vertebra, and you will see that is different. Besides this, there are other differences regarding the size of the vertebral body, the shape of the vertebral body, and for example, even the shape of the vertebral foramen, or even the way that the articular processes are located. This is a good view to see the superior articular process like here, and inferior articular process here, and superior articular facet, that's the one that you see here, and inferior articular facet, that's toward the other side, that's behind this process. This is the whole process, the facet is on the other side. So these ones might be different between the thoracic and lumbar area too. Like for example, for the thoracic area are located in this view that you see the anterior here, posterior here. They're located like here and here, compared to the lumbar area that they are located like here, medial and lateral. These are anterior and posterior. For the lumbar, they are medial and lateral. I'm just mentioning this, that there are other differences too, but the best thing for you is just to know that how do you recognize these ones in the lab, and that is through the spinous process, the length and the orientation of the spinous process of these two vertebrae. So as you see here, besides the superior and inferior articular processes or facet, we have a few more facets that we call them costal facet. Costal means related to rib. So these are the places that thoracic vertebra is going to attach to rib. We said that each thoracic vertebra is going to attach one rib on each side of it, right? So we have one transverse costal facet here, and we have two of these ones, superior costal facet and inferior costal facet, because that many of the thoracic vertebrae are attaching to the rib in two places. So this superior with the inferior of the above one, it's just one ribs attached here. The same is for this inferior with the superior of the lower vertebra. The rib is attaching here, and also like imagine this rib is going and attaching to these other ones. When we get to the rib, I will show you how the rib has 2 points of attachment to a thoracic vertebra. So here you see that from the superior view, again you have all those facets for the superior articular facet here, and also for that transverse costal facet. And the inferior costal facet is located here, and superior costal facet located here. So besides that, you see that we have transverse process, we have a spinous process, we have vertebral foramen, and we have the body and all the other things that each typical vertebra has. So that was regarding the thoracic vertebra. Now for the lumbar vertebra, that we have 5 of them. And if you look at that from the side, you see that obviously one thing is different from the thoracic vertebra, that the spinous process is shorter, is almost like a square, and is just a straight backward, not downward, right? If you look at that from the top superior, we don't have it here, but if you look at that from the superior, you will see that the body of the vertebra is among the biggest one from the whole vertebral column, because the whole weight of the body is going to go over this vertebra. And other differences regarding the orientation of the articular processes and all. So lumbar vertebra, that there are 5 of them, L1 to L5, and support the weight of the torso. Vertebral bodies are quite large, and spinous processes point posteriorly, not downward. So that was the 3 regions of the vertebra. Now the sacrum. Sacrum, that we said that there have been 5 separate vertebrae at the beginning of development, but then at the end they get fused completely and make one single bone that we call it sacrum. And the coccyx, that you see that here have been 3 to 5 bones. Now you need to know the parts of the sacrum, that we go over them mostly in the lab, but here we just briefly review, the rest remains for the lab. This is the posterior view of the bone here. This is the lateral view, and this is the anterior view. So on the first thing that you see, that it has a triangular shape. So this one is the apex, and this is the base of that. The 2 sides of that, each one is called ala. Ala means wing. And then you see a line here that is actually the places that the 2 vertebrae have been fused together. We call them transverse, right? Then the other things that you see, all these foramina, sacral foramina, they are in the sacrum, and they are all those intervertebral foramens that you had between the 2 vertebrae. Now all these ones have been fused, so you have them all in one place, right? Then the other things that we have, this part of the, if you look at the shape of the sacrum here, right? This upper part is toward the anterior, and you remember that we have the sacrum as a primary curve, and it is concave toward the anterior. So this up part of that you can see that here, it is like a promontory of the land that goes into the sea, is going upward, going into the pelvic cavity that is in front of us. Therefore, we call it sacral promontory. So that is this area of the sacrum here. Not on the top, just here, right? Then when you look at the side, this is the anterior, this is posterior, right? Toward the anterior side, you see this shape that is like an ear. Therefore, we call it auricular surface. It's not articular. Articular means like the joint surface, right? Auricular means the shape of an ear, right? The sacrum is going to attach to the pelvic bone and makes the whole girdle, the complete belt at the pelvic area, right? Therefore, it's going to make a joint between the sacrum and a part of the pelvic bone in the pelvis that we call it ilium. This joint is called sacroiliac joint or SI joint, sacroiliac joint or SI joint. And here you see this auricular surface that you have it here toward the anterior of the sacrum. You have the same over the ilium too. You have an auricular surface over the ilium. When we get to the appendicular skeleton and we talk about the pelvis and we talk about the ilium over there, remember that you have the same auricular surface on this side, that is sacrum. And on the other hand, posterior to that, against we are talking about this ala, the side of this ala that you see from this view, right? On the anterior, you have auricular surface. On the posterior of that, this is a rough area that we call it sacral tuberosity. So these two usually confuse with each other, so just the best thing to just go with the anterior and posterior. Anterior is auricular, posterior is tuberosity. The other things that you can see here is important. This is this median sacral crest, this one, that you can see that in posterior view better here. These are actually the fusion of all the spinous processes of all the 5 vertebrae that we have. All of them now together make a crest, and we call it median sacral crest compared to the lateral sacral crest that we have on the 2 sides. Those are from the transverse processes. Now, on the posterior, the other things that you can see, you see that at the very top, you have one articular process that is going to attach the sacrum to the last lumbar vertebra, right? So that's all the articular process of that. And you have a canal here that we call it sacral canal. That is the beginning of that. And the end of that is a specific name that we call it sacral hiatus. So these are the things that you need to know from the sacrum. And these are just all those that I told you about the sacrum. And for the coccyx, that consists of 3 to 5 fused vertebrae. And the important thing is that the orientation of the coccyx can help you to recognize between the pelvis of a male and female when it comes to recognition of the bones and determine what sex this bone is belonged to, right? Between male and female, coccyx can be a good point of recognition because, as we said, the whole sacrum and coccyx are concave toward the anterior, right? But this last part, that is coccyx, if it is a male, it points anteriorly like this. And that one makes this cavity of the pelvis that is in front of that more close, right? So after this part, we have the exit that if there was any baby here, head of the baby has to pass through that to go through, right? Now, if it is more anterior, it remains less space. Imagine this is just this size, and less space remains in front of that so that the head can pass through that, right? Comparing to the female coccyx, that it is not anterior, it is more toward the inferior, and that one provides more space for the head of the baby to pass through that. So remember this difference. Male coccyx is pointing anteriorly, the female coccyx points inferior. And these are all the things that we just discussed about the sacrum, and these are all that we discussed, and I'll show to you all of them. And this one, just pay attention that the coccyx, it has a part that we call it coccygeal corner, that if we take back to this picture, we see them here. These are coccygeal cornea on the upper part of the coccyx. And pay attention that the coccyx can be called coccygeal bone, specifically if they are more, if it is more than one, they call it coccygeal bones. So that was regarding the vertebral column. After vertebral column, we go to the thoracic cage. So for the thoracic cage has two structural functions. First, it protects the heart, lung, thymus, and all other structures that are inside of the thoracic cavity. And it serves as the attachment site for muscles. Those muscles are involved for the respiration. When they contract, can make the thoracic cavity bigger, therefore the air can get inside. For the positioning of the vertebral column, they keep the vertebral column and the whole posture of the body in the place. So we need this cage so that the muscles can attach to them between the rib and the vertebral column. And movements of the pectoral girdle and upper limbs. So when we go to the muscle, we will see that lots of the muscles that go over the shoulder, that we call it pectoral girdle, they start from the bones of the rib and the thoracic cage. We call the shoulder pectoral girdle. The whole this area, chest area, is called pectoral, whatever is related to that. And girdle is like a belt that is connecting the upper limb to the axial parts of the body. Now for the thoracic cage, as we said, it includes the sternum and the ribs. So starting from the ribs, there are two types of the rib classification that you need to know, both of them. The first type is to dividing the ribs to the true ribs and the false ribs. We call the first 7 ribs, 1 to 7 pairs of the ribs, as the true ribs, because they are connecting to the sternum directly. And the rest of them from pairs 8 to 12 are called false rib because they are not connecting directly. The other type of classification is that we make it more detailed instead of just saying true and false. So the first 7 still are together and we call them vertebral sternal. We go from where to where. So when I show you the rib and we're going to talk about the rib more closely, you will see that rib is a connection between the vertebral column on the posterior of the thoracic cavity toward the anterior that is attached to the sternum. Now, first 7 pairs of the rib have a complete connection between these two, complete and direct. It starts from the vertebra and end up and attached to the sternum directly. So therefore, we call them vertebral sternal, that they are actually equal to the true ribs, right? The second part is called vertebral chondral. They start from the vertebra and they are coming to the chondral, means the cartilage of the costal cartilage. You remember costal cartilage are the cartilages that are between the ribs and the sternum. But these are not going to the sternum directly, they are attaching to the cartilages of the lower ribs, like the rib 7, right? So these ones are called vertebral chondral. And the final parts that the 11, so those ones are rib, the vertebral chondral are rib 8 to 10. And the last part that there are pairs 11 and 12, that these two do not have any anterior cartilage, and even the ribs are not completely coming out anterior, but it just remains mostly over on the posterior part. Therefore, they are floating, and we call them floating ribs or just vertebral ribs, because they're just attaching only to the vertebra, to nothing else. So here you can see the picture of those ones. This is the whole thoracic cage, or sometimes we call it rib cage. And here you see that you have the sternum that we're going to talk about it and all the parts that it has, and the ribs that you see that we have from pair 1 on both sides, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that each one of them has a cartilage. We call these ones costal cartilage, as these are the cartilages as attaching to the ribs. So up to rib 7, each one of them has one connection to the sternum. After that, there is no more connection here. All the other ones, pair 8, 9, and 10, are connecting to the cartilage of the rib 7. Therefore, those ones are called vertebral chondral. The first one, the two ones, we're calling vertebral sternum. And the final two ones with 11 and 12, they just connect to the vertebra and come to the side up to here or up to here. They're not coming to the anterior to attach to anything else. So those are just vertebral ribs. So that was regarding their ribs and their classification. Now let's go over the structure of one rib to see what does it have. So we said that the ribs are 12 pairs of the ribs, and each rib articulates with the thoracic vertebra. And the structure of the rib, it has a head, a neck, a tubercle, an angle, and body. I will show you all this picture. And besides this, the inferior side of the rib has a groove. We call it costal groove. Costal again means rib, right? The groove that we have under the rib. And this is a passage for the vessels and nerves, so that be protected. So the rib itself is protecting the nerve and artery that is passing under them. And each rib has one connection to the sternum through something, or going toward the sternum. We call that side sternal end. The other side that is connecting to the vertebral end, actually we call vertebral end. It has a superior and inferior articular facets, so that it attached to the thoracic vertebra, and it has interarticular crest. So let's see all these ones. First here, you see, let's go over the rib itself first. So you see all the parts. This is the head, this is neck, and then this is the angle when the direction is changing and makes the body, the whole body of it. Now it has a tubercle here after the neck and before getting to the angle. And these are the places, the two places that a rib is going to attach the thoracic vertebra, this one, tubercle and the head. And that's the way that is located. To first orient yourself, this is the body of vertebra, therefore this is anterior side, the spinous process is posterior side, right? So the rib is attaching here, the head of the rib, and this is the vertebral end where we have the head, neck, and tubercle. This is the vertebral end because it's going to attach to vertebra. And the other end of that is going toward the sternum is sternal end, right? It's going to attach to a costal cartilage or just be free, right? So, but pay attention that the pair of 11 and 12, they do not have much of the curve, a lot as like this. So This is the vertebral end, this is the head, neck, and this one is tubercle. This tubercle is going to attach to the transverse facet here, costal facet that we had on over the transverse process, and the head is going to attach to the superior and inferior costal facet of the vertebra. And then if I want to show you this rib, it starts from here, comes back toward the anterior and attached to the sternum on the anterior. The same is happening for the rib of the other side, and this is the way that making a cage here. So I believe that I explained all parts of the rib, and again just reminding you that the transverse a thoracic vertebra has all these facets for the attachment of the rib of it. And here you see that from the posterior view how this how this thoracic vertebra is attaching to the rib from the vertebral side here. And you see all the three ribs and four ribs. And finally, it's the sternum that consists of manubrium, three parts, manubrium, body, and xiphoid process. So sternum has three parts. The first part, upper part, is manubrium. Then the main part in the middle is body, and you have a triangular process over there. At the end, lower part, we call it xiphoid process. So it has only three parts and you need to know each one of them. If I ask you name this part of the sternum, you have to name it specifically. And on the top of that, we have a notch that we call it jugular notch. That if I show you here, you see that this is the manubrium, the first part. Then you have the body, this part, and you have a xiphoid process, this part here. And you have a notch here that you can feel it over in front of your neck. That put your finger over there, you feel it. We call it jugular notch. Sometimes they call it sternum notch. That's the same. And that was the last part of the slides. So that's the second part of the axial skeleton. And in the next video, we go to review the appendicular skeleton.